Hello, is this Margaret Holloway? I was standing in my kitchen, still in Robert's old flannel shirt. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 4 months after I buried my husband. The dishes from breakfast were still in the sink. A half-drunk cup of tea sat on the counter, cold. I hadn't been doing well at finishing things lately. I didn't recognize the number. It was a Cincinnati area code. I almost didn't answer. Yes, I said, "This is Margaret." There was a pause. Not a short one. The kind of pause where you can hear someone on the other end deciding something, deciding whether to go forward or hang up and never call again. She went forward. She said 5 words that rearranged everything I had ever known about my life. I was Robert's wife, too. I didn't say anything. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. The refrigerator hummed. The world kept moving the way it does when yours has just stopped. "Hello," she said. "Are you still there?" I was still there. I just didn't know in that moment who I was anymore. My name is Margaret. I am 58 years old. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, the middle daughter of a high school history teacher and a woman who ran the church choir for 40 years. I grew up in a house where the doors were never locked, where dinner was always at 6, where people said what they meant and meant what they said. I believed in those things my whole life. Honesty, consistency, the idea that the person sleeping beside you is the person you think they are. I was married to Robert Holloway for 31 years. He was a civil engineer, steady, methodical, practical, a man who looked at the world and saw problems to be solved and systems to be built. He drove the same model of car for 20 years. He had the same brand of coffee every morning. He wore his watch on the wrong wrist because he'd put it on wrong the first time at 16 and never changed it. I loved that about him. The consistency, the way he was the same person at a party as he was at home, the way you always knew where you stood. We had a house in a quiet part of Columbus that we'd spent 20 years making ours, a garden I planted every spring, a kitchen we renovated twice, a back porch where we'd sit on summer evenings with no particular agenda. We had a joint savings account with $340,000. He had a life insurance policy worth $1.8 million through his company, and he had a business, a civil engineering firm he'd built with his partner Gary over 22 years, worth at last professional valuation just over $2 million. We had 2 children, Daniel, our son, who is 30 now, Priya, our daughter, who is 27 and lives 40 minutes away with her husband, and our first grandchild, a little boy named Ellis, who was 8 months old when his grandfather died. Robert died on March 9th. A cardiac event, sudden, without warning, without time for goodbyes or last words, or any of the things you imagine you'll have. He was at his desk in the home office we'd built together from what used to be a spare bedroom. I was downstairs making coffee. I heard nothing. I called up to ask if he wanted eggs, and there was no answer, and I thought he had his headphones in. He didn't have his headphones in. I thought that morning was the worst of my life. I thought grief was the thing I had to get through. I thought the hardest chapter was the one that had already started. I was wrong. If this story touches something in you, please hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered something about someone you loved after they were gone? I need to know I'm not alone. Let me take you all the way back to the beginning. I met Robert when I was 24. I was working as an office administrator at an architecture firm. He came in for a client meeting, introduced himself to everyone in the room, and shook my hand last. He looked at me for a second longer than was necessary and said, "I'll probably need help finding the conference room. I have no sense of direction whatsoever." He was lying. He had a perfect sense of direction. I found that out later, but it got us talking, and that was the point. Our first date was dinner at a restaurant that no longer exists, a small Italian place on the east side with red-checked tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. We were there for 3 hours. Robert asked questions the entire time. Not surface questions, real ones. What did I want my life to look like in 10 years? What did I believe in? What was the thing I was most afraid of? Nobody had ever asked me those things on a first date. Nobody had ever asked me those things at all. I went home that night and called my sister Carol and said, I think I just met someone serious. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He did it in the garden behind my parents' house, the one my father had been tending since before I was born, on a Sunday afternoon in October when the maples were at full color. He got down on one knee in the grass and he said, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I can't come up with a single reason not to. That was Robert. Not poetic, precise, but underneath the precision, something certain and warm. We got married at 27, 120 people, my mother's church, a reception in the church hall with a band that played too many slow songs and not enough fast ones. My father danced with me to a Frank Sinatra song and whispered, He's a good man, Maggie. I can tell. I believed that for 31 years. We had Daniel at 29. He came early, 3 weeks before his due date, at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday in November. Robert drove to the hospital at 40 miles an hour the whole way, gripping the steering wheel, and when Daniel was finally placed in his arms, he looked at him for a long time without speaking, and then looked at me and said, Okay, now I understand everything. Priya came 3 years later. She was an easier birth, a funnier baby, a child who seemed from the very beginning to have opinions about everything. Robert called her the board member because she would sit in her high chair and observe the room with the expression of someone evaluating a quarterly report. We were a family. That sounds simple. It was not simple. No family is. There were arguments and silences and seasons where Robert and I moved around each other more than toward each other. There were years when the business consumed him, and I felt like I was raising 2 children alone. There was a period when Daniel was 14 and going through something we couldn't name or reach, and Robert and I disagreed badly on how to handle it. But we always came back to each other. That was the thing I was most proud of. Not that we never struggled, but that we always returned. We went to counseling twice in 30 years, both times briefly, both times because we chose to, and not because we had to. We had a rule that we didn't go to sleep unresolved if we could help it. We had a rule that we said, I love you every single day, even on the days when we weren't sure we liked each other very much. I thought those rules meant something. I thought they were evidence of a real marriage, a real partnership, a real man. Gary called me the day after the funeral. He was crying. Genuinely, I thought. His voice was thick with it. Robert was my best friend. He said, 22 years. We built everything together. He talked about you all the time. Margaret. He was so proud of this family. Thank you, Gary, I said. That means a great deal. I thanked him. I thought he was being kind. I did not know yet that Gary knew everything. That Gary had known for 14 years. That Gary had helped. The call came on a Thursday in July, 4 months and 1 week after Robert died. I had just come back from a grief support group that my doctor had recommended, a circle of 9 women in a church basement, meeting every Thursday evening, each of us navigating a different kind of loss. I had been going for 6 weeks. It helped in the way that being witnessed helps. You feel less alone in the dark. I was still in my coat when my phone rang. Cincinnati area code. Her name was Diane Marsh. She was 49 years old. She was a landscape architect. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati's Hyde Park neighborhood, in a building with a rooftop terrace she described to Robert once as the main reason she'd signed the lease. She'd been with Robert for 14 years. Let me say that again, because it needs to be said slowly. 14 years. Daniel was 15 when this started. He was in the middle of that difficult year, the one Robert and I had argued about how to handle. Priya was 12. She was still doing ballet, still leaving her backpack in the middle of the kitchen floor, still coming into our room on Saturday mornings and getting into bed between us like she had when she was 5. And for all of that time, all of it, Robert had been flying to Cincinnati twice a month on client business. He had a furnished apartment there, paid through the company account, recorded as a client accommodation. He had a wardrobe there, a routine, a life. Diane thought they were engaged. He had given her a ring, not a formal proposal with all the words, but a ring on a Tuesday evening in their apartment, with the explanation that he was working through some complicated personal things, but that she was his future, and he wanted her to know that. She believed him. She had been waiting for the complicated things to resolve for 8 years. She found out Robert had died from his obituary. She had been waiting for him to come back from what she thought was an extended project in Columbus. He'd told her he'd be largely unreachable for a few weeks, something complicated at the business. When the weeks stretched to months and his phone went to a disconnected message, she started to panic. She called Gary. Gary did not return her calls. She Googled Robert's name. She found the obituary. Our names. Our children. Our grandchild Ellis. 31 years of a marriage she had no idea existed. She sat with that for a week before she called me. She spent that week, she told me later, trying to understand what she was looking at, trying to decide if there was an explanation, trying to make the picture in front of her fit the man she thought she knew. There was no explanation. There was only the truth. She called me because she thought I knew. She genuinely, completely believed that I knew about her. That Robert had been honest with me, if not with her. That we'd had some kind of open arrangement or separation or understanding. She was calling to grieve together, to share the loss of the man they had both loved. I sat down on the kitchen floor, still in my coat. I did not say a word for almost 2 minutes. How long did you say? I asked finally. 14 years, she said. Her voice was very quiet. 14 years. I have to go, I said. I hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. The grief group bag was still on my shoulder. The room was dark because I hadn't turned the lights on when I came in. I sat there in the dark in my coat, and I tried to locate something solid, something that was still true, something that hadn't just been rearranged. I couldn't find anything. Every memory I reached for had a new question attached to it. Every business trip, every late night, every moment he'd been warm or distant or distracted, all of it was being resorted in real time, re-examined under a light that changed everything. I called Priya at 11 o'clock at night. She could hear it in my voice before I said a word. Mom, what happened? I told her. She was in her car 40 minutes later. She drove with Ellis in the back seat, asleep in his car seat, because her husband was away for work and she wasn't going to wait until morning. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Robert had eaten dinner for 25 years, and she took both of my hands and she said, Mom, we need to find everything. 3 days after Diane's call, I went into Robert's home office for the first time since he died. I had not been able to go in. I had closed the door the evening of the day he died, and I had not opened it since. His coffee mug was still on the desk. His reading glasses were folded beside the keyboard. There was a notepad with his handwriting on it, a list of things to follow up on, practical things, the kind of list he always made, the last list he ever made. And seeing it was like seeing him in the room, like he'd just stepped out and would be back in a moment. He was not coming back. I sat in his chair. It still smelled like him. I opened his laptop. Robert was methodical about everything, including his systems. 2 years before he died, Our neighborhood had a serious break-in, and Robert had spent an entire weekend setting up digital safeguards, password managers, encrypted backups, an automatic email forwarding system that copied everything he sent and received to a secondary archive account. He had shown me the archive account, sat me down at the same desk, walked me through it. If anything ever happens to me, he said, all the important records are here. Contracts, correspondence, financial documents, everything. He gave me the login. I wrote it on a piece of paper that I put in the filing cabinet in the spare room and forgot about entirely. I found the piece of paper on a Thursday morning in July. Priya was with me. Ellis was asleep in the portable crib we'd set up in the guest room. I logged into the archive account. Robert had forgotten, or perhaps he had simply never imagined, that everything meant everything. Every email, every single one, going back 7 years, the limit of the archive's storage, including correspondence with Diane, including correspondence with Gary about the Cincinnati apartment, about the business account being used to cover it, about how to categorize the expenses, including emails about a personal savings account Robert had opened in his name alone, a separate account, at a bank we did not share, holding $214,000. I read for 4 hours without stopping. Priya sat beside me the entire time. We did not speak much. There was not much to say. The emails said everything. The picture that emerged was complete and terrible in its completeness. Robert had maintained 2 full lives, ours in Columbus and Diane's in Cincinnati, for 14 years with a precision and consistency that I recognized immediately as the same precision and consistency I had always admired in him. He had managed the logistics of 2 households, 2 women, 2 sets of emotional demands, with the same methodical attention he gave to his engineering work. He had systems. He had protocols. He had, apparently, a very high tolerance for the cognitive burden of sustained deception. Gary knew. From the beginning, Gary had known. There were emails going back 6 years in which Robert and Gary discussed the Cincinnati situation openly, the cost of the apartment, the cover stories for the billing, what to tell clients when Robert was unavailable, and more recently, what to do about the estate when Robert eventually died. There were emails from less than a year before Robert's death in which Gary and Robert discussed, in practical terms, how to ensure certain business assets were protected in a way that would benefit the Cincinnati situation. What they had not discussed was the archive account. It was Robert's own system, set up for his own protection, and he had never mentioned it to Gary. They did not know I had it. I printed 240 pages. Priya drove to the office supply store and bought an accordion folder. We organized it by date and by subject. Then I called an estate attorney named Helen Park, who had been recommended to me by a friend who'd gone through a difficult divorce 2 years before. Helen was 61, small, and completely still in the way of someone who has heard a great many terrible things and stopped being rattled by them. I sat across from Helen in her office on a Friday morning, and I put the accordion folder on her desk. "I need you to tell me what I have," I said. She read for 20 minutes. I watched her face. She gave nothing away. Then she looked up and said, "What you have, Mrs. Holloway, is evidence of sustained financial fraud by a business partner, conspiracy to redirect estate assets, and 14 years of marital fraud. The last of those is a civil matter. The first 2 are potentially criminal. Do you want to pursue all of it? Every single piece of it?" I said. The investigation took 11 weeks. Helen brought in a forensic accountant named David, who was methodical in the way that people who spend their lives tracing money are methodical, unhurried, thorough, speaking in facts and figures with no editorializing. Within 3 weeks, he had mapped the full extent of what Robert and Gary had built together. The Cincinnati apartment had been rented and furnished through the business at a cost of approximately $42,000 a year for 14 years. That was $588,000 in business expenses used to fund Robert's personal life, money that had reduced the business's taxable income, money that was legally ours as a marital asset, money that Gary had signed off on in his capacity as co-director. Gary had moved quickly after the funeral, a commercial property held in the business name. A small office building worth $310,000 had already been reclassified in the business's records, a reclassification that would have removed it from estate consideration. 2 client invoices totaling $87,000 had been redirected to a holding account Gary controlled personally, and the Cincinnati account, $214,000, had been accessed twice since Robert's death. A debit card in Diane's name, which Robert had issued to the account, had been used at a grocery store and a pharmacy in Cincinnati in April, 6 weeks after Robert died. Diane didn't know it was an estate asset. She thought Robert had left it for her. She had no idea it was money that legally belonged to us. Gary was called into a meeting. 2 attorneys and David, the forensic accountant. The accordion folder, 240 pages. He offered to discuss options. He offered to make things right privately. He said that Robert had wanted things a certain way, and that he was just trying to honor his friend's wishes. Helen told him there were no options to discuss. There was the evidence, and there was the law. Gary was charged with breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conspiracy to misappropriate estate assets. His own attorney advised him to settle before it went to trial. The settlement took 4 weeks to negotiate. Gary returned $187,000 in redirected funds. He paid $95,000 in damages. He surrendered his entire share of the business, 22 years of partnership gone. He signed a non-disparagement agreement. He was removed from the company's registration. I did not attend any of those meetings. Helen attended them for me. I received calls with updates. Each update was a number, a clause, a resolution. I wrote them down in a notebook and said, okay, and thank you, and hung up and sat with them for a while before I could move on with my day. The Cincinnati savings account was frozen and released to the estate in full. Diane had no legal claim. Robert had never divorced me. Whatever he had told her, whatever he had promised her, whatever that ring had meant to her, none of it had legal standing. She was, in the language of the law, a third party with no recognized interest in his estate. I did not feel triumphant about that. Diane had been deceived for 14 years. She had built her understanding of her own life around a man who was not who he said he was, the same way I had. She had lost him too, in her own way, first to death, and then to the discovery of what he actually was. I did not reach out to her again after that first call. I thought about it many times. I am still not sure whether reaching out would have been generous or simply painful for both of us. I did not wish her harm. I do not wish her harm. She was a victim of the same person. Robert's business was restructured. A new managing partner was brought in, a woman named Sandra, who had worked in civil engineering for 30 years and who took one look at the accounts and said, I can fix this. Within 8 months, the company was operating cleanly, profitably, and without secrets. The life insurance policy paid out without dispute. The estate was settled in full by the end of November, 8 months after Robert died. Total assets recovered and protected just over $4.1 million. Every dollar. I want to tell you about the day the estate closed, because it was not what I expected. I thought I would feel something large. Relief or victory or closure, one of those words people use when something difficult ends. I was sitting in Helen's office when she told me the final settlement had been executed, all accounts cleared, all disputes resolved. She shook my hand across her desk. I thanked her. I drove home. I made a cup of tea, finished it this time, and I sat on the back porch in the cold November air, and I cried for a long time, not about the money, not about Gary or Diane or the settlement. I cried because I missed my husband, not the husband he turned out to be. The husband I thought he was. The man who got down on one knee in my parents' garden. The man who gripped the steering wheel all the way to the hospital. The man who sat at this same kitchen table for 25 years and said, "I love you every day." That man was real too, I think. Some part of him. I have decided that I am allowed to grieve him even as I acknowledge the rest of it. These two things can be true at the same time. I did not choose that complexity. He gave it to me without my permission. I also cried because of what I had not found in those emails. I had read 4 hours of correspondence, 14 years of a hidden life documented in careful detail, and I had searched against my own better judgment for evidence that I had been wrong about our marriage, evidence that he had been unhappy or that I had failed him somehow, or that there was something I had missed that might explain how a man becomes this. There was no such evidence. Robert had not been unhappy. He had not been escaping anything. He had simply, and this is the word I keep coming back to, simply wanted more than one life. Not instead of ours. In addition to it, with no apparent conflict in his own mind, no apparent guilt, no apparent sense that any of this was wrong. He had wanted what he wanted, and he had taken it, and he had told himself whatever story he needed to tell himself to keep going. I have spent a great deal of time sitting with that understanding. It is not a comfortable place to sit. I have to tell you about Daniel and Priya because this story is not only mine. Priya found out the same night I did, sitting at my kitchen table, reading the emails over my shoulder. She processed it the way Priya processes everything, quietly at first, and then all at once. She went home 2 days later and sat her husband down and told him everything. She called me from her car, afterward parked in their driveway, and talked for an hour. She was angry. She is still angry in the way of someone who loved her father completely and has not yet found a place to put what he turned out to be. She comes to see me every week. She brings Ellis. I think she is keeping a closer eye on me than she lets on. Telling Daniel was the hardest conversation of my life. He lives in Portland now, and I did it over the phone because I couldn't wait for him to fly home. He went quiet in a way that scared me. A long, deep quiet. Then he said, "Mom, are you okay?" That was the first thing he said. Not about Robert, about me. He was on a plane 2 days later. He stayed for 2 weeks. He did not talk about Robert very much. He helped me clean out the home office box by box. He repainted the back porch. He sat with me in the evenings, and we watched old films and ate takeout, and he fell asleep on the couch with his head on a throw pillow. And I looked at him and thought, "You are so much like him, and I hope you are nothing like him. And I love you so much it makes me ache." He went back to Portland. He calls every Sunday. We are all reassembling. It looks different for each of us, and we are trying to give each other the space to do it in whatever way makes sense. There is one more thing I want to say. In those 4 hours of reading, I found one email that I have never mentioned to anyone until now. It was from 6 years ago. It was a personal email, not about the business, not about logistics, not about finances. Robert had written it to himself, apparently saved in his drafts folder, never sent to anyone. It was 2 paragraphs long. In it, he wrote that he sometimes felt he had built a life that was too good to risk and too small to contain him, that he loved his family in a way he could not explain or articulate, that he was aware he was doing something wrong and had no intention of stopping, that he told himself the people he loved would never know and therefore would never be hurt. He was wrong about that. We were hurt. We are hurt, not because we found out, but because it happened, because it was real while it was happening even when we didn't know it, because 31 years of a life we believed in was also at the same time something else entirely. I have not decided what to do with that email. I have not deleted it. I have not shown it to my children. It lives in a folder on my laptop. And some days I think I will never open it again. And some days I open it and read it and close it again and try to understand something that I think may not be understandable. I have decided that that is acceptable. Not everything resolves. Not everything should. I still live in the house in Columbus. The garden I planted for 20 years is dormant now in winter, but it will come back in spring. It always does. Robert's flannel shirt is in the back of my closet. I have not decided whether to keep it. Maybe I never will. Maybe it will just stay there. Not gone, not present, just somewhere in the back of things. Ellis is 14 months old now. He pulls himself up on the furniture and falls down and does it again, stubborn and cheerful. Priya brings him every week. He has Robert's eyes. I have not decided how I feel about that either. What I know is this. When someone dies, their secrets don't die with them. They just change hands. They pass to the people left behind, who have to decide what to do with them. I also know that grief is not powerlessness. I was the most exhausted, most shattered version of myself when I sat in Robert's chair and opened his laptop. I was not looking for evidence. I was looking for him. And what I found instead was the thing that protected my future. The thing he had built accidentally to protect himself that ended up protecting me. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if it means something or if it is simply the way things fell. What I know is that I protected myself. In the worst season of my life, with the ground entirely gone from under my feet, I did the work. I made the calls. I sat in the attorney's office with the accordion folder, and I said every single piece of it. And I want to say to anyone listening, anyone in the middle of their own loss, their own confusion, their own sense that the world has been rearranged without their permission, you are allowed to protect yourself. You are not too broken. Grief does not disqualify you from fighting for what is yours. Get an attorney before you sign anything. Ask questions, even when the questions are frightening. Trust the part of you that says something is wrong even when every other part of you just wants to lie down. You are not too broken to protect yourself. You are not too tired to find the thing that changes everything. I promise you that. I am still here. I am still standing. Some days that is enough. Some days it is more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story.